I was trying to point out. Okay. The maintenance of logic is just that, a maintenance of thinking, maybe. But I don't think so. And thinking, if you're going to just say a being in the mind of, then yes, all things are thoughts in the mind of God, so the maintenance of logic is a maintenance of thinking. Logic is thought for God, if you're going to go that far. If you're talking about our thinking, I don't agree with you. Logic, as far as I'm concerned, is something that comes secondarily to consciousness alone. Right. What's under that? What is the non-logical squishiness that brings this about? Unless you can make some statements about it, your account is not very useful.
Okay. Um, yeah, the underlying squishiness that supports logic, that comes prior to logic in consciousness. This brings about the idea of waking up into a logical space where you're, well, how to phrase this, how to backtrack. Certain losses that occurred in life um, generated and philosophy generated a patterning of deconstruction where I had lost my internal monologue, and I should backtrack also, meaning to talk about knowledge, our knowledge. My personal experience, I find very few people that run around the fringes of what it is I'm discussing, but at one point I lost my internal monologue, and it took years to get it back. I mean, I was on YouTube when I finally got it back, and it's still only periodic, and it's kind of a fractured internal monologue. But at one point, and not having an internal monologue, I also lost my sense of depth perception. It's as if my mind was ricocheting really quickly, but when I awoke, like my hand to my face here was the same distance as it is to here, meaning everything just became outlined color splotches again and again and again and again, where 3D reality was just a paper tiger. It was just a two-dimensional cutout. And there was a huge loss of identity. There was a loss, I had shaved my head and eyebrows and ended up sitting somewhere for a few days pissing myself, and there was a huge break in terms of name and the concept of I, as I was trying to re-identify with who I was, how I related to momentum within history, kind of youthful idealism that's not broken or sidetracked in any way, doesn't suffer from what it is I was suffering from. But here I am waking up without a sense of identity, without an internal monologue, hearing everything from an outside source, and losing my sense of depth perception, and being just haunted as if I was in a lit up paper bag having sounds impress upon it. At this moment, I felt completely shattered, like I was, as William Burroughs would say, iron dust. And the iron dust was picked up from a magnet and then let go, demagnetized, and it fell down onto a mosaic. And from there, there was a restructuring, a repiecing together from identity outward, semblances of my life, and logic was not apparent. Spatial identity was not apparent, meaning I could move through, like, the reflexes within my eyes that allowed dimensionality to occur. It was like it was being rewired hardwise, but my psyche had taken over. It was like trumping the hardwiring of the eye in this collapse. And from there, as I re-engaged identity and I re-engaged contradiction, and I started to see that things were apparent to others as they were apparent to me again, I realized that the very raw base structure of logic was something that was founded on particles of language as we relate to our physiology. Even if we don't regularly have language that relates to our physiology, how we immediately wake up and intersect our environment and generate a kind of a presupposed epistemology comes into place right when you wake up, so you can go to the bathroom or do whatever it is you're going to do right when you wake up. And so to me, it goes without saying that logic is something that is on a fractured, something that's coagulated in the rational person. It's already coagulated, but it was kind of like, in this deconstructive process, it was kind of like going back to Babyland and sensing the world in fractured ways, piecing together sounds, piecing together senses again. And so there wasn't a coagulation of this logical space that we immediately wake up into and our eyes reflect to, and you have a sense of who you are, and you have a sense of rationality. It was something that preceded that was more gooey. And so these are my words about it. This is my testimony, if you will, about the underlying root to logic as I've experienced it. And so I did want to lay down some words there for Eric Orwoll, as kind of talking about a means in which you could take apart yourself as you were taking apart a computer, but start with the software aspect, the psychological aspect, and reduce it, break it down, annihilate it, and then work on destroying your hardware. You could overuse drugs or mess with your physiology in a particular way, or get into heavy meditations about losing your identity, about trying to lose your identity. Most people have enough confidence and sense of self that they're not going to attempt to die within themselves. This idea of dying within yourself was one of the motivators to annihilating one's identity and then trying to refound it like a foreigner. You're found as a foreigner in your own body, awakening to this kind of like you're an alien inside of a human body that is a little unfamiliar, like you've repossessed yourself. And so prior to this repossession, there's this gooey organic mosaic of fractured signs and symbols and senses as you re-relate to your physiology and your physiology to the environment. And so that's where I say that logic is secondary to consciousness. That the logos, the word, not having an internal monologue, I don't even agree with that. I guess it was called death metal or whoever you commented on beforehand, that the logos, what is to say about the logos that you get your identity when you have the logos. The congealing aspect occurs when you have the logos. When you're pulling sense together, when you've pulled sense together, that's when the logos is in play, and that's when your sense of identity can flourish and come about and be presumed as it normally and naturally is in a presumed state. So there is a type of retrograde process of self-annihilation that I think some sort of travesty might have to happen in your life, a wish for self-annihilation might have to happen, or maybe there's something wrong in my genes, but I don't think so. I think this came across with spiritual meditation. And then my spiritual interactions, well, I've gone over those so many times I don't even want to talk about it anymore. But Eric doesn't seem to, I don't know, engage my videos with a sense of knowing what my history is and what my claims are and how it is I seem to step outside of truth. And Eric has this propensity, instead of believing in spotty, periodic, like generational enlightenment that happens in multiple places, through synchronicity, but in a non-locality. He doesn't buy that. He thinks things move in waves of influence, and I'm not denying that they do move in waves of influence, but different groups of people can come to similar conclusions about things. Meaning, I might even say that maybe there was something environmental that happened in two different spots that allowed for blue eyes to occur. And this is a question of, diachronics versus synchronicities, in terms of how it is you want to look at information traveling, memes traveling. And so Eric's whole philosophy is built on an influential wave instead of on spotty enlightenments. People with similar pieces of information coming to common conclusions in different locales and outside of general relationship with one another. And that's why I call it like a generational enlightenment that happens, that would happen sporadically. And so I don't know. That's the general paradigm I think that Orwell uses when he studies his history and when he maps together things. That's why I question his natural state of mind. He seems precocious in how it is he's pulling together facts and figures, and yet the manner in which he wants to orchestrate how the influences are put together is a matter of assumption and speculation, and I welcome it. I think it's a fabulous thing. I think it's a fabulous approach. I think, though, that it's not without its criticisms. There can be criticism on about that approach on a very fundamental level. Eric also seems to reference God in terms of the infinite, and if I had him on one of my art shows, then I would be able to talk to him about that, about his conceptions of God. So still to date, I've only found people that have similar outlook in terms of logic being secondary to a substratum of consciousness that the unexperienced would have a difficult time laying words upon and for and through. And I compare the deconstructive process to a reprogramming or a programming of a child, a prelingual infant. Even before that, an infant that has a difficult time focusing on things, a peekaboo infant, to regress into you know, where the peekaboo game, I even had a line, I lost the peekaboo game, it just became the boo game, was a line that I would sing to myself to get myself out of the tragedy of becoming prelingual again in my adult life at the end of my 20s is when that happened, at the age of 29. So anyway, there's some words. I'll go ahead and link this video to his video. I'm probably not covering a lot of the other things that he mentioned, but I did want to throw that out. And I appreciate his video. Let me actually play just a segment more and see if there's any more comments I want to make.
And that doesn't mean that it's not true, but its lack of
That
usefulness prevents me from evaluating its truthfulness, which makes it not useful even to consider.
So once again, he's only looking for truth and finding that truth is the only thing that's worthwhile to consider. Instead of consideration for the sake of consideration itself, a wafting idea, a fleeting idea. Eric has this compunction to want to configure things into a truth apparatus in his own mind, and I think that this has to do with his mnemonic devices, how it is he's trying to put things together in memory, and that's where he comes from. But this quest for truth, this drive for truth, where truth may be found as a focal point of different trajectories pointing to a similar spot, you know, not, you know, there might be a center to all circles, but not all centers to all circles are true, meaning they're not the true point of, I shouldn't have said that. I was trying to use a metaphor for circles. Let me see what else he says here.
I suspect you are in your headspace habitually, so you sense it as that which is natural.
That's
and
what
why
I'm
not
saying
assume
to him.
that? Yet I suspect the mental construct which echoes logical space can be deconstructed to a more benign sloshy state, whence contradiction as rudiment can express itself.
That's what I'm saying.
Perhaps you're not giving any evidence. I'm trying to give evidence for my position, but you're not really addressing my position. Your claim.
Well, yeah, I didn't know what the position was that he was making initially when I interjected. I just took a parcel of what he said and made a comment on it. But I in this video have made my evidences, my claim, my testimonies.
That because I'm in my headspace habitually, it just seems natural to me. I understand that I'm not perceiving directly the metaphysical ground when I'm thinking about these things. I'm thinking that
he's not perceiving the metaphysical ground as he's perceiving these things. That was part of the deconstructive process, to annihilate oneself into finding that ground, finding the most rudimentary ground. Once again, one's relationship to one's physiology relative to the environment, the reaction of the eye as it perceives a depth perception on kind of an automatic basis. What does it mean to trump that and rewrite that?
I've listened to a lot of other people talk about this sort of thing. I've read a lot of other people talk about this sort of thing. I've tried to grab from it what I could, and through my understanding, I've now developed an ability to represent these ideas to myself, and I don't think they are, in their essence, logical before their comprehension. I think there is a more benign sloshy state.
Okay, so here he's agreeing with me, and I just wanted to put forth my words in kind of an organic manner, but here he is, he's kind of agreeing that the logic, that there's something that comes prior to the putting forth the logic, and then he talks about springing forward. It's the space from which we spring forward. Well, I wanted to put words to the metaphysical ground, to a process, in terms of negatives and losses and absences, because putting forth positives about what it is would, the best I could say is your eye's reaction for depth perception and your mind's epistemology to be able to immediately organize the space as rational and logical, and like any other mammal moving through its space, it's aware of its spatial dimensions. But what makes humans unique is that it has language which can toy with the psychology and undermine and pull the carpet out from itself, provided one's mind is, I want to say, shamanistic enough to allow a complete breakdown, a complete rewrite of one's own hard drive, one's own C drive.
The undifferentiated being, which is never expressed, which is the ground from which we move forward. We have to understand that's the source.
So Eric says the undifferentiated being is never expressed, and I'm trying to grant expression to it. And the closest, author I can think of was William S. Burroughs, as far as personally expressing a deconstructive meltdown of self and form and whatever the leftover rudiments are of his position. I recommend him as an author, but I also don't recommend him as an influence. So it'd be hard-pressed. You're going to be influenced by him, but I don't recommend the influence, but I do recommend the what he puts forth.
Of our divinity, the static feminine within us eternally, and all activity outside of that is Shiva, and Shiva's fun, but it cannot destroy Brahma.
Okay. And so he's saying that the initial ground is the feminine static state from which everything arises. And that's fine if he wants to go in that manner. I don't have a problem with somebody that perceives it that way. And it's interesting that he said static, because there was a sense of a loss of kinesis also, basically kind of throwing a wrench in almost every consideration that you could have about your own psychology and your own relationship to your universe, on an attempt to find the ground from which we spring.
Contradiction is rudiment. What is the meaning there? There's a meaning here that I can agree with. Is that your meaning?
Now he's testing me. Contradiction is rudiment. To be honest, I don't even know if that's my comment or not. Contradiction is rudiment, but there to be a contrary facilitating of one's embracing the outward infinite, and then one's attempt at finding one's ground. That the contradiction lies in a directionality, whether or not you're in a bear market, a bull market, moving in a linear time, or whether or not you're not moving in linear time and you're in retrograde. You're reducing yourself back to infancy. So you're not really in bear or bull market. You're moving the timeline in reverse, so to speak. Anyway, that's really all I have to say. I had to take a break from the other painting because I was moving way too slowly on it, and so I needed something to do really quickly to speed things up. So I'm working on this new clown painting, and so forth. And I don't know. It's probably a commission piece. Meaning, if he likes it, then great. Okay. Anyway, thanks for your comments. Ciao. Bye.